Hi, hello everyone. Um, so what we're going to have a look at today is what affects a CPU's performance. Now, there's lots of things that affect a CPU's performance, but I suppose we'll go through the basics, especially. So most of the things that affect a performance are hardware. Unfortunately, it is. So we'll have a look at the main hardware kind of culprits, and they tend to be the CPU, the RAM, and the GPU. Okay, central processing unit, random access memory, and graphical processing unit. So we'll have a look at the three of them and see what's going on, why. Okay, so the CPU. The CPU really, what gets the CPU kind of going depends on a number of things. The threads, the cores, the clock speed, and the caches. Okay, so we'll have a look at these in turn and we'll see, can we kind of tease out what's going on with each of them. Okay, the clock speed. We'll start with the clock speed because probably one that a lot of people hear of, but they kind of really don't understand what it actually means. Okay, so this is the number of instructions a single processor can carry out per second. Okay, so instructions per second, and it's measured in hertz. H said, okay. For most desktop computers, there'll be somewhere around 3.5 gigahertz. That's 3.5 billion instructions per second. Obviously, the higher the clock speed, the greater the number of instructions that can be carried out per second. But obviously, some CPUs can be what's done is overclocked. I don't know if you've ever heard that concept before, overclocking. Okay, to make them run at a higher clock speed than the factory set rate. But it's risky if it's not done correctly. It can make the CPUs overheat, and if they overheat, that's going to cause problems. So you obviously need more circulation of the heat to get it away, which means more sinks and maybe water-cooled system, and it can cause crashes or permanent damage to the system. So you need high-performance cooling systems really for that to work. Okay, air won't do it. You need water circulating. I know it sounds crazy, but anyone who's into their serious rigs will understand what I'm talking about here. You need a water-cooled system if you're going to be overclocking on a kind of persistence basis. Okay, so that's what the clock speed means. Pretty obvious. Okay, we'll have a look at cores next. Okay, so the number of cores also affects it, because when you think about it, each core can process independent of the next core. So it doesn't need to wait for the other core to do or have to wait in line or anything. So the more cores, the better. Okay, the more instructions it can carry out. So the faster it can process a batch of data, for want of better words. Most PCs, smartphones have 4 or more. So it's all gone to 4 plus. 4 is kind of was the standard maybe up until about 5 years ago. Now it's 8 is the standard, but you can get 16, 32 core systems. I've definitely seen a lot of 8-core systems on the go, octa-core, and I've seen 6-core systems, hexa-core and octa-core systems on the go. Okay. It's not quite as simple as the double number of cores doubles the performance. Okay, because the software needs to be designed to use multi-core processing, and not all processing tasks can be evenly split. Some are dependent on other tasks. Some tasks can be done separately. Some need one thing to finish in order for another. So it's not quite as simple as you would think. So that's on cores. Cache size. We've talked about this briefly when we're talking about the von Neumann architecture, but obviously the cache is the data stored inside the CPU temporarily, and it's obviously much faster than RAM, even though it's a bit slower than the registers. Obviously, large CPU cache will give the CPU faster access to more data. And remember, we had L1, L2, and L3. L1 to L3. So L1 is the fastest, L3 is the slowest, but L3 is cheaper, L1 is a lot more expensive. Generally speaking, that's the case. And then threads. So this is kind of where there's fun going on at the moment, because at the moment, your two main kind of CPU providers, Intel and AMD, they're kind of in a battle, and AMD seem to be winning this battle in terms of the core, but where AMD are kind of losing the battle is in terms of the threads. So a thread is one entire process through a CPU for one instruction. So imagine you're just tracing one instruction as it moves through the von Neumann architecture, from program counter over to MAR, over to memory, back into MDR, back into accumulator, back into control unit. That's one whole thread. But Intel have the ability to do what's called hyper-threading. Okay, so it's kind of an unusual kind of concept. It's where they can simultaneously multi-thread the technology, okay? And it does give you a distinct advantage. It means that you don't have to have as many cores, that you can get away with less cores because you can, do multiple threads in the one core. So it's kind of a trade-off. Less cores needed than you might need with the equivalent AMD Ryzen series, but so there's a trade-off there. Okay, it's a very interesting trade-off. So obviously, generally, CPUs with more threads, higher clock speeds, more cores, or larger caches will have better performance, but of course, they're going to be extremely expensive. Okay, on top of that, then what about our RAM? More RAM means faster, smoother systems. It's as simple as that. If a computer has too little RAM, it's not going to run due to the use of tons of virtual memory, unfortunately, because it'll have to kind of farm it out to the secondary storage. Obviously, the more RAM, the more applications, the more memory-intensive applications can run smoothly, making it faster overall. It's very easy to upgrade RAM on all PCs and most laptops. It's just a matter of replacing the sticks with a higher capacity or a higher speed ones. DDRM, 4 or 5 or whatever is coming out next. The only thing I would say is, as I've talked about this before, some of the newer kind of, especially the Ryzen's, the Ryzen or the Ryzen and AMD type of computers, they're soldered, and it's particularly true of the likes of WeWay and all Honor and all those type of companies. They're soldering in their RAM, making it very hard to take it out and replace it. So what you buy is what you get forever. Okay, and finally GPUs. Okay, your graphical processing units are specialized circuits for handling graphics and image processing. Okay. They also relieve the processing on the CPU, giving it free. But, of course, we all know what they're being used for nowadays. Yes, that's right. Crypto mining. Okay. So, that's why they're becoming very expensive. It's not because everyone's suddenly become a gamer. It's because people are using them for crypto mining. Okay. Computers have a basic GPU integrated into the motherboard or into the CPU. But obviously, for better graphics, you're going to need a dedicated GPU used. High-end graphics cards can easily improve the performance. Of course they can, especially for PC gaming or design software or anything like that. So you kind of do need them. But it is quite interesting that most people will not look at this when they're getting a computer. They'll look at the price tag. Whereas if they really actually do some work, bit of research, you could be buying what you think of as a very good computer with a very, very low spec, whereas it could be a very relatively cheap computer with a ridiculously high spec, but people don't look for it because maybe they look for a brand name or they look for something in particular, you know what I mean, that is this good for doing that, that type of way. They'd be the kind of the main areas that you're talking about. So next time you go into a shop, you should be able to at least look at some of these. Look for the clock speed. Make sure it's good and high. Look for the number of cores. Make sure you have a lot of them. Okay. See, does it have any hyper threading? Okay, does it have a dedicated GPU? Is there at least 8 gigs of RAM, if not 16 gigs? What's it running? With regards to the RAM, that type of thing. That's what you really need to be looking at. Okay, thank you very much. Bye.